Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series on Thursday, a special edition, where it is our continued privilege to share with you the experience, insights, and wisdom from the people that are shaping the OTT CTV industry. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly integral to the media and entertainment industry, it brings a host of ethical considerations that cannot be ignored. From content creation and distribution to audience analytics and personalization, the deployment of AI raises critical questions about privacy, bias, transparency, and accountability. Our presentation today is from Papercup. Senior Content Marketing Manager Hannah Donovan and Head of Growth Amir Jirabande will be discussing ethical implications of AI and in media. Welcome, Hannah and Amir.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for having us again.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. It's nice to be here.
Hey, both of you. So I think you have some slides, Amir, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we thought it'd be quite interesting to actually try to incorporate as much AI as possible. So instead of either myself or Hannah presenting this live, we've pre-recorded the slides and created a virtual avatar of Hannah and cloned her voice to actually present it. So my name is Amir. I look after marketing and growth at Papercup. Papercup essentially automates large part of dubbing with humans involved to enable content owners to take their content global. And we come across this ethical dilemma quite often, consulting our clients in terms of what are the ramifications, what they should watch out for. So this presentation is more of a food for thought and different key components that you should be aware of when it comes to incorporating AI or generative AI in different parts of the media landscape. All the work has been done by Hannah, so it's not by me. All the credit goes to her. And Hannah, as Eric mentioned, is our content lead at Papercup, and I'll let her do a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into the slides.
Sounds amazing. All right, let's eat.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of words about what was interesting in the process of actually creating this avatar, because it kind of firsthand threw up questions about ownership. So especially over my own voice data, how it could be used, who it could be used by, and all credit to the company that we used to produce it. They have a very good kind of privacy policy, so it was all quite clear. But it just is a quite interesting illustration of how generative AI can be used. Well, has the potential to be used or misused. So hopefully that becomes clear when you kind of watch the presentation and see how good the lip sync actually is. They didn't manage to catch my northern accent, but hopefully it's enjoyable anyway. So yeah, I'll pass over to you, Amir.
Thanks, Hannah, and we'll stay around for questions afterwards. So I'll start the presentation. Just bear with me one moment. Fantastic. All right, here we go.
The ethics of AI in media, a chunky topic. So here's what we'll tackle today. When we say media, we're talking specifically about streaming and broadcast. And we'll be talking specifically to ethical issues we have direct experience of across the entire content spectrum, from content creation through distribution to content consumption. A quick introduction. I'm Hannah, content lead at Papercup. This webinar is created using AI, and this is a virtual avatar of me. We've used text-to-speech for my voice, and it's been cloned using a tool called Synthesia. Papercup is one of the pioneers of AI dubbing, and we work with a range of media companies from small distributors to large studios. Our lifelike AI voices are perfected by professional translators and voice actors to ensure the highest level of accuracy. And we work with content owners like Fremantle and Jamie Oliver, Bloomberg and Insider to amplify their content to a global audience. First, an overview of what we're going to talk about today and the exact issues that we'll tackle. Well, what's on people's minds right now when it comes to artificial intelligence? A litany of things: privacy, transparency, employment and economic impact, safety and security, and many more that I didn't include here. Let's boil it down to some broad categories that relate to the use of AI ethically in media. For video content owners, we're going to focus on 3 pillars: creation, distribution and monetization, and lastly, consumption. On the creative end, we've got to think about what data is used to create an AI product, be it AI voices, meta descriptions, or video creation? Has it been responsibly sourced? With the right permissions? Are the AI voices built using data representative of the world at large, or is it biased? And on distribution, if electronic programming guides are personalized by AI, how do people discover content outside of their existing worldview? On the consumption side, how do we or should we make audiences aware that what they're consuming has been touched by AI? And in what way? As you can see, there's a lot to go through. But to be concise, we've narrowed it down to 3 common themes. These themes that emerge are around data use, data bias, and misuse of AI to deceive or defraud. Then we move to trust and disclosure, key to building a loyal, returning audience. Lastly, it's regulation and responsibility. This could be the platforms, the AI vendors, or legislation. When we consider data used to build products, training data, we consider whether that data is representative of the world at large or limited to a specific demographic and worldview. Bias. Bias ultimately limits who can use a product, or in our case, what kinds of content can be dubbed. We also consider how data is sourced. Does it fall under open source licensing? Is it commissioned for a specific use case? If so, what are the terms of usage? The evolution of generative AI has happened so fast that legislation is still catching up. This means that the use of data tends to still fall under copyright laws created for more traditional types of media. This can be seen with cases like the New York Times suing OpenAI and Microsoft for allegedly using its content to train its models without permission. With the rise of generative video, most likely trained on publicly available visual data, in addition to licensed visual data, will more content creators and video owners find themselves in the same position? And with legislation lagging, what's the answer? Industry bodies like SAG-AFTRA can protect creatives' rights to a point, but it's falling to the technology companies themselves to set their own ethical standards and protect against misuse of their products. When these powerful tools are made available to anyone, they can be used anonymously to their own bad ends. This is misuse, but misuse is a spectrum. It can be using data without consent or using data beyond an agreed scope, all the way to creating deepfakes of presidential candidates to spread false news to affect election outcomes. Without clear regulation on how these solutions can be used, vendors and end users, in this case media companies, have to put in place guardrails against their misuse. Look at the big social media platforms today and how, even though there's much more to be done, they're being held accountable for the content shared on their platforms. So what is the content owner's responsibility? And how can you get ahead of it? We believe that right now the onus is on the technology providers to self-regulate and on customers to hold them accountable in order to foster and maintain trust with their own audience. When onboarding a new generative AI solution, you should opt to choose a gated service, for instance, or choose a provider with an ethical pledge. Ensure that your vendors have their own internal AI standards and can provide an accurate representation of its data sources. Now, we've touched on how data is used to build generative AI products and who should have access. What about how it's used to help audiences select content? When and how should companies disclose the use of AI to their audiences? And how can audiences trust the content being shown on their screens? Without putting on our philosophy hats as far as trust in the media is concerned, I believe these are some of the key principles to discuss. With transparency, we're talking about how audiences are made aware of the use of different technologies and AI in their content. For example, has Tom Cruise now become fluent in Hindi, or is this a voice clone created using machine learning? Or me speaking right now? I had to clone my voice using a product called Synthesia. I had to dig into Synthesia's privacy policy to understand who owns my voice data. And since my account was made through Papercup, Papercup now owns it. How clearly is this visible to users when they give their voice data? Human in the loop is basically the concept of having human oversight and intervention in an automated AI workflow. Having some level of human oversight means that we're not entrusting the entire workflow to machinery, which, while incredibly sophisticated, can't yet be totally relied upon not to hallucinate, misinterpret, or even plagiarize, which can damage brand trust and jeopardize audience confidence. AI has been used in media for nearly a decade. Amazon's Alexa came on the market in 2014, popularizing the use of synthetic voices in the consumer market. YouTube has been using machine learning for its recommendations engine since 2015. When it comes to blockbusters, computer-generated video effects have been dominating our screens, making the impossible and unimaginable come to life right before our eyes. Audiences are now so used to CGI and VFX that they are revolutionary now, not because they can create the unbelievable, but because they can do so with significantly streamlined workflows and diminished turnaround times. These use cases have been in play for years without anyone raising an eyebrow. But this was largely because they were used to portray high action or total fiction, scenes in which viewers were not in doubt as to the realism or not of what they were seeing. Now, with the lines increasingly blurring between the real and the fake, new use cases are continually emerging that require deeper ethical and legal scrutiny. Back in 2021, Morgan Neville used an AI company to recreate Anthony Bourdain's voice to narrate his letters without disclosing that it wasn't the genuine voice of the writer. In an interview with The New Yorker's Helen Rosner, Neville disclosed using AI to clone the food writer's voice, and the story hit global headlines. The main two issues were the fact that this wasn't disclosed to audiences and that permission allegedly hadn't been granted by Bourdain's estate to use his voice data in the film. Just 2 years later, and we've got things like SAG-AFTRA's independently created digital replicas, which stipulates that digital replicas can be created only with the permission of the actor or her estate. But interestingly, this is an example of the industry adapting to new technology rather than being forced to do so by legislation or in lieu of legislation. In contrast to the Bourdain case, James Earl Jones, the iconic voice behind Darth Vader from Star Wars, gave permission to Lucasfilms and Disney to immortalize his voice by making a clone of it that could be used even beyond his lifetime for future movies. This is an example of explicit consent granted for explicit use cases. Probably one of the more complicated and some would argue less exciting topics to discuss. However, it's impossible to ignore. For the sake of all of our sanity here, we'll focus on Western government's stance on AI use and regulation. Then get into where the responsibility for safeguarding and standards should lie across the whole industry. Just like the earlier internet years, legislation is slow to be implemented, and often for good reason. They don't want to slow down the pace of innovation. This creates a tricky situation for all. As an example, the UK's Computer Misuse Act came into place in 1990. However, this was based on much earlier laws around physical trespassing. Only in 2006 was this enhanced to tackle more relevant computer-based safeguarding issues. Several existing legislation apply to AI. GDPR laws, for instance, mean that after this webinar, I can request that my voice data be wiped from Synthesia's database. And there are new laws like the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which came into force this month. Beyond this, governments are working on frameworks like the USA Senate's AI Working Group Roadmap and the UK's Framework for AI Regulation, both of which set out roadmaps that support integrating AI regulation into existing laws, while also considering new legislation tailored to AI's unique challenges and opportunities. Lastly, we've got companies, vendors, and content owners taking action to regulate themselves with ethical pledges, dedicated AI teams that stay abreast of legislation, and things like gated services and watermarks that we touched on earlier. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act categorizes AI systems into 4 levels of risk: unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal or no risk, and sets out obligations for how companies should act depending on how they're categorized. But what might strike you about these governmental regulations is their dates. Arguably, the greatest developments in the productization of generative AI have happened in the last 24 months, after the latest of these was published. In this environment, industries are advocating for themselves: SAG, AFTRA, the New York Times, and numerous others against other AI companies. We're also seeing a lot of vendors and media owners working on licensing deals to future-proof themselves in light of evolving ethical and legal legislation. The USA's Senate Working Group Roadmap and the UK's Framework for AI Regulation take a pro-innovation approach to AI. They consider how AI regulation should be integrated into existing laws while also considering new legislation tailored to AI's unique challenges and opportunities. The UK also has the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which advises on ethical issues related to AI and data-driven technologies. At the end of last year, the UK government held the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park, which focused on the global governance of artificial intelligence. It was attended by academics, civil servants, government and industry leaders from 28 countries, and the outcome was the Bletchley Declaration, a document outlining a shared commitment to collaborate on AI safety, transparency, and accountability. We're also seeing AI companies publicly call on their industry to hold itself accountable as legislation is being drafted. And international organizations that tackle pressing AI issues together with companies at the forefront of the field. Papercup is one of the World Economic Forum's tech pioneers involved in publishing information about the use and danger of AI in industry. To wrap things up, when it comes to adopting AI in media, these are the main questions you should ask yourself and your vendors, and how you should communicate them with your audiences. Can you provide a representation of your training data? What measures do you take to prevent bias and ensure fairness in your AI models? How do you ensure consistent accuracy? Do you have a human-in-the-loop system? And lastly, discuss audience disclosure with your vendor. They should know the levels of disclosure required for their own products. That's all from me. Now we'll go to real-life Hannah and my colleague Amir, Head of Growth at Papercup, to take any questions. Thanks for listening.
Okay, that was interesting. So you're back, right? This is the real Hannah?
The real Hannah, although I'm not, it's not clear because I'm wearing the same top. I thought I'd try to
You
confirm.
are, yeah. Do you always wear that? Is that just, you know,
This is just the uniform, yeah.
uniform? Yeah, that makes
One
sense.
less decision.
It's sort of like Steve Jobs would, yeah. Just open the closet and there's just a whole bunch of black tank tops hanging out.
Yeah.
Well, that was how did you feel about that? Seeing yourself as an avatar?
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange. I think it's all very well knowing and reading about deep fakes. You know, we're sort of hearing about them all the time. It's quite another thing seeing your own deep fake. You know, seeing the potential for you know, you to be saying anything. So that experience is unique, I think. You know, reading about it versus seeing yourself and having the ability to voice anything is you know, it's weird. But I think also it highlights the potential of this sort of technology, and also the kind of need for self-regulation, really, and parameters around how it can be used. And actually, you know, all credit to Amir's going to have to jump in here because I trip over the name of this company every time. Synthesia. Their privacy policy is really good, and they have like a manual process at the end of a video. So when you're generating it, it goes to a team and they have to kind of, you know, assess the content and approve whether it's, you know, damaging or whatnot.
And that's human in the loop in practice, right? Even though they provide a self-service tool, there's still some self-regulation in terms of misuse and how it's being, what kind of message is being portrayed, or have you actually cloned you rather than cloning your boss or, you know, someone more nefarious. So yeah, credit to them for sure.
Yeah, it's I mean, it seems to me like, I mean, I have so many questions. We could talk about this all day, but it just seems like it's I have like a bunch of distrust, I guess, you know, and I'm a really trusting person, really, like, probably too much, but when it comes to like this idea of regulating this, because you could fake people regulating, like everything could be fake. It's, you know, and how are you going to be able to keep on top of all of the potential misuse, and because it's getting easier and easier to do, you know, any ne'er-do-well could come up with a deep fake, and if they're trying on purpose to mislead people, there's no regulation or self-regulation that's going to stop them from doing that. And I think, you know, you're not really necessarily talking about that maybe when you're talking about media, but I don't know if you're talking about big media, maybe, you know, organizations, companies that have a lot of money are going to be a lot more on not that they have necessarily less integrity, but if they've got a lot of money at stake, it's a little more important for them to kind of be with the angels on this stuff. But for organizations that either don't have a lot of money or have a position that they're trying to make, I don't know. What do you think that there's extra risk there?
I think the main message that we tried to convey in that presentation was there isn't one single place that is going to provide the safeguards in order to use these tools successfully, ethically, and legally. That's why the onus needs to be across the spectrum from, yes, legislation, but we can't rely on it just because, as you just suggested, it's unthinkable all the different case studies and use cases that this could be used for them to actually put safeguards around it. So that's why it needs to be across the board, from legislation to the content owners, the users of AI, and the vendors. Ultimately, personally anyway, the main area that I think we need to have transparency is for the audiences when it comes to media. We're not trying to deceive audiences. So if these tools are being adopted, then everyone needs to do their homework. Everyone needs to become educated. If you look at the internet boom at the beginning, legislation took decades to actually come in place in a correct way to curtail bad actors. And it's still not there. And it'll probably never get there 100%. But how can we make sure that everyone is educated enough to be able to use and consume and incorporate these tools internally? So when it comes to these big media companies that you're speaking of, the title of this presentation is actually part of a breakfast briefing session that we had in London with some large media organizations. It was Chatham House rules. So unfortunately, I can't quote anyone directly, but we have some of the large studios there as part of our panel, as well as some other AI vendors, discussing how they incorporate AI into their work streams. And most of them now have AI committees and go through very rigorous processes before incorporating any of these tools, just because if you have a tool, and I'm just going to use Papercup because I can, it's easy. If you're going to incorporate Papercup into your workflow, you don't want Papercup to be in the news later saying it's been used by a bad actor elsewhere, because that would discredit everything that you've done with the organization. So you need to do that due diligence. And that's the core message, is the onus is across the board, starting with the vendors to make sure that they put some of these safeguards and transparency in place. And at the end of it, for the media owners to make sure that they're as forthright with their audiences as possible.
And I think it's important to draw a distinction between, I mean, AI is a very big world. There's AI and there's generative AI, and a lot of this technology has been in use for a really, really long time, and no one is afraid of it at this point. The AI that's been in our daily lives for years. I mean, the Spotify list that's selected for you, the things that come up in your YouTube feed, when you use QuickBooks to do your accounts, like we as individuals have been encountering AI for a really long time, and we've evolved with it, and I think that will happen again. We become better at identifying what role it's playing in our everyday life, and I think for the individual that's really important. Individuals do have to educate themselves and kind of understand where they're consuming generated, media. But
Yeah.
to Amir's point, there's a duty of care for
I think
vendors.
you're right. I mean, I don't know, maybe, we've all gotten better at recognizing, when there's phishing emails that we're getting and spam. Like it seems like it's pretty hard to fool people that are trying to stay up to date on the tools and the techniques that the bad actors are using. And and I think that's similar. You mentioned like Spotify and the music services, and I don't know, I listen to a ton of music and I can tell when something's an algorithm, versus somebody actually picking stuff out. And it hasn't been around for a long time. So, like, I think the big fear is that, you wouldn't be able to tell. And I gotta say, Hannah, that was a great avatar, but like I don't know, I like you a lot better than than that one.
And I think that's kind of a good point, because it's use case specific, I suppose. Like there are very specific use cases. Some of our clients, some of our customers, our product is absolutely, I mean, I don't want to blow our own trumpet here, but it's perfect for their use case. They have news and it's fast and they need to turn around translation, dubbing quickly. And they couldn't do that with ordinary dubbing services. Like they couldn't go into a studio and sit with a voice actor and do takes again, because the nature of their work is that they need to get it out. It's time sensitive. So that use case is like a perfect fit. But like you say, for something like this, perhaps where it's discursive and we're talking about, very tricky topics, perhaps the human engagement is what people want. We're a forum here.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, the thing that I often come back to when I'm thinking about AI and the fears that folks have about it taking over people's the creative aspects of people's jobs or things like that. And I just think it's going to give us all an opportunity to kind of level up, and do things that computers can't do. I mean, if a computer can do what I'm doing now, that'd be great, because then I could do something else,
That's
and
exactly it.
like the avatar version of me can take care of this. Not that I don't love
That's
doing that,
exactly it.
but this is something else I can do. And
That's exactly it.
that would be something that a computer can't do. And like, wouldn't that be great? That's, we're all advancing, like not just what gets done, but I think our own experience of being alive, if that can happen.
That's exactly it. We speak to publishers and media quite often, speaking to the press even, and the common question across AI, not just in media, is always the fear of job replacement, and rightly so. And this is by no means the utopian view, and I believe is probably a more realistic view that is exactly what you just mentioned, where AI is being used for productivity to increase output in certain areas that allows the same person to focus your attention on something where you need that creative, artistic human touch. So if you're going to translate that into, say, a blockbuster movie and how synthetic media, be it synthetic voices or synthetic actors or whatever it is, where that potentially could come into place, just to provide a very simple use case, is imagine like Lord of the Rings, big blockbuster, ridiculous amounts of characters. Imagine where you can partially automate all the tertiary, what were the bad guys, not the ogres, the orcs, or
The orcs.
Exactly. Imagine you don't have to rely on having an army of actors, and they already use CGI to buff it up. Imagine if you automate a large part of that and focus your budgets on the primary and secondary actors, and elevate that even further. That's where it gets interesting. And you can kind of apply that simplicity across the board when it comes to generative AI and probably AI at large.
Yeah, there definitely will be, displacement of people
Absolutely.
into different roles and different and it's always like, I don't know, that's the way it's always been, when we start building machines that can replace the things that people do, like building cars. We don't need people to build the cars the way that we used to. And that's tough, for people that are right now doing that. But, longer term, it's better because it's probably dangerous in a factory building cars and doesn't pay very well. So we can find, more productive things for people to do. That's, I guess, the more, utopian view of things.
There's like a cute little anecdote I read in the New Yorker about a guy called, I think it's Phil Tippett. I hope I got that name right, but basically he used to be a head of a Go Motion team that did sort of all the big feature films. And then when I think it was the Jurassic Park, basically they put out a kind of call for the most realistic dinosaurs, and the CGI came into play, and this Tippett guy was basically like, I think I'm extinct. And actually, like following that, I think he basically went on to produce some of the most award-winning CGI characters around. And I think it's such a good example of like what you talk about, that like leveling up of a kind of a role. And it is utopian, you're right. I mean, it's not going to be like that across the board, and of course that needs consideration. But I do think in some areas we are going to see that kind of leveling up happen, and it's quite exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. And I mean, there also needs to be there's obviously social impact for that. So gosh, we're talking about all kinds of stuff now. And that needs to be taken into account, and we need, as a society, I believe that we need to take care of people that are in that situation, because not everybody's going to be producing that, that great movie with the skills that they have as a CGI or as an artist in the CGI world. Yeah,
it's true. And I mean, I was a copywriter for years, and I think I'm one of the first to go, really. I mean, like, the better you get at prompts, the sort of better the written content that you can produce. So yeah, it definitely requires consideration, and I think you see it with the likes of SAG-AFTRA. They're considering how they protect their creatives. They're putting in place this digital replicas kind of. They're trying to think about how they can do it in lieu of legislation being finalized, and I think you will see that across the creative industries.
It's I mean, getting industry leaders together to have discussions about this, raising these issues and working on projects to help self-regulate, as you say, is really important. Are you aware of any of those discussions that are going on now in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of
the latest one. Yeah, I think is what's available in the public domain. So the latest one was the one that Hannah mentioned, where it's talking about the likeness in perpetuity, either the voice or the features, visual features. And some of this has actually been in use for quite some time. So it's just redrafting some of the older versions of what they had to protect the actors. But there is we don't have any hot scoop for you, unfortunately.
Yeah. I wonder if there's and you mentioned in tool sets also. I think that's none of this stuff happens without software and tools, and so building some of that into, and that's something that as responsible software organizations, we can build into our tools as well. I think a watermark of some kind can be something that could be deployed to demonstrate that you are, as an organization that's making an avatar, or making generating some of these images and audio, that you're a responsible player, because
it's there now. It's happening now. That's something that we're working on. I've also spoken with a handful of startups who are looking at this most scalable solution to apply watermarks across any generated AI output in the Gen AI space. So that's in play now, and it's already working. And even the distributors and the platforms like YouTube, again, I know for a fact they have it on their roadmap to actually provide certain badges and marks to provide that transparency to the audience.
That's super
cool. I mentioned, I think the ultimate goal is making sure you have responsibility, or you're responsible for what you're producing or how your tool's being used as a vendor, and never to deceive the audience.
Yeah, that's super cool. Okay, I want to ask you one more thing, Hannah. So watching yourself as an avatar, did it seem like you, or were you like, no, I don't look like, that's not me?
I mean, it missed I'm from the north of England, a county called Cumbria, the Lake District, and it missed my northern accent. So I suppose that is a big reason it didn't necessarily capture that aspect of me. But I think it captured my facial expressions very well. The lip sync was almost perfect, I would say. I mean, it wasn't like me talking and then, it wasn't completely mismatched. I mean, you could tell it wasn't me. I think if we hadn't have disclosed it at the beginning, you probably would have been able to tell. Yeah, I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The audio is, you can really tell the difference, and I wouldn't know whether it was North or, what it was. Obviously I could understand the Avatar version of you really well, and they sounded British, but
Yeah.
that's about as far as, it didn't sound like they were from Liverpool, but necessarily. But
I think it probably lacks a level of engagement that me as a human can deliver, I would imagine. That's probably the
absolutely.
big, that's the big.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that, it seemed a little robotic in a way,
Yeah.
and pauses. There was, like I think the machine you was, pausing, but it didn't seem like the pauses were, supernatural all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've been programmed to pause sometimes. I'm gonna pause now.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting, because the way I see it is that perhaps our use of the avatar in this instance was almost unnecessary. It was almost kind of an illustration of what can be done with technology. But I suppose, so if we were thinking about Papercup as a company, what we're trying to do is content that wouldn't necessarily lend itself to being dubbed into other languages. It would just be stuck in a language. So that's a big difference to me, where you have content that would just be available to a very limited audience. But when you use, machine learning to dub it into other languages, suddenly you have this content that can then be viewed by people all over the world. So you can almost, I don't want to say forgive, because I think that does a disservice to how good our voices actually are, but you're gaining something that offsets what you lose in engagement of an actual physical person. So it's such a big world. It's sort of the instance where you have to review each use of the technology individually in a way, which is a long-winded.
Because you get something else, and it's, I mean, to use your point about music, in Spotify as an example, I love it when somebody puts together a real playlist with, like, I picked out all of these songs on it, and you can tell there's the love in that playlist. But there's also, a ton of utility to the algorithms. You just, and so what you're getting. It's not as good, but it's it really does serve a purpose, and that's great.
Yeah, and sometimes the odd song makes it onto your super playlist, and then you're like, yes, the algorithm really got it back.
That's right. No, I
The
do.
only dub.
I think it's great, and that's something maybe that it'll come back with vinyl. Maybe we'll start making cassettes now, because we can, like, those are you can't do that if you're a machine. Come on.
I know.
I really made this. It's on a cassette.
Oh, yeah. I still have my mixtapes that were made for me by various people.
Oh God, that's wonderful. Do you have anything to play them on? Like cassette
Yeah,
player?
I still do actually.
Yeah. Well,
I
that's
have
cool.
my portable, I don't know what do you even call that? Discman?
Yeah,
Walkman,
but it was a disc thing, right? They had CD
Yeah.
versions of those.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Those
Yeah,
were crummy, because, like, I remember walking around and it would just, like, jiggle, and my CD would be skipping all over the place.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, actually, we have a question here, and this is from an anonymous attendee. Thank you. Any mouse. And it's about generally, folks that are intentionally trying to deceive us and using technology that is continually advancing, that we're talking about. To do that, they're not going to take advantage of, they may even fake a watermark, to try to make it look like this is, a real, this, this is real. This is not fake Tom Hanks or fake Hannah. It's actually the real thing. Um, that's going to require some policing. It's sort of outside, it's part of media though, right? Because this is if it's unless it's yeah, news is kind of media as well. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I think there's a couple of elements to that. Just a quick anecdote to watermarks. The main challenge that watermarks are tackling today, and to some level have achieved, is the watermarks are encrypted. So they're as good as the best encryption that you get on any messaging service, for instance. So they're not meant to be. They're supposed to be quite hard to break. So we can take some solace in that they're not easy to replicate, but as a broader question around the bad actors, that's exactly what we're talking about, the onus being on the vendors and providing platform access to just anyone. As Hannah mentioned with Synthesia, when we actually exported this video to show today, it went through a human validation process. Obviously, some of them wouldn't get caught. So you can potentially, if you throw enough at it, you probably get one through that's a bad actor. But just having that safeguard stops a lot of the bad actors. That's one. And also providing platform access directly. So not everyone should have access to these ridiculously powerful tools that can be used in very malicious ways. So going through a human at the very beginning to actually vet who the customer is, KYC, know your customer, I think is really important. And lastly, where is it being distributed? The onus is on them. So is it being hosted on YouTube? Is it being hosted on Facebook or wherever it is? That's really, really important. Obviously, the challenge at the moment is dark social. The amount of fake news that's being spread around is probably slightly less on the open platforms and more on private platforms like WhatsApp groups and stuff like that. But ultimately, the onus needs to be across the board, and it just can't sit with one area. So as rightly this person mentioned, legislation can touch this. It's going to be very hard to regulate this. But there is multiple other safeguards that we can put in place to actually reduce the number of things like this to get out in the open.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That makes me feel a little bit better with regard to this question. Hannah, anything from you on this or anything else?
I was actually thinking I really can't add a great deal to that, but I do think Amir kind of covered it. There's like a big intersection when it comes to these sorts of things. It's who creates it, who facilitates the creation, who amplifies it. There's a kind of joint duty of care between all of those different areas to prevent misuse. And I do think bodies that bring together heads of these kind of businesses are useful as well. We mentioned the World Economic Forum, they do their Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which focuses fully on kind of AI and generative AI, brings together heads of multiple companies. And those people are really kind of trying to think about how they can best, educate and prevent the misuse of their products. I think that sort of thing is really important and useful. So yeah, like dialogue, a lot of dialogue, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Groups like OTT.X, for example.
Exactly.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all this. It really gave us a lot to think about. I really enjoyed it, and thanks to the folks at Papercup for their work that we don't get to see, that made the avatar version of you, Hannah, and the software that's doing all of that magic behind the scenes. Really enjoyed it. And thank you to our audience. Really enjoyed your being here. Even though we don't get to actually see you, we know you're there. As always, this session was recorded and it's going to be available on our website at OTT.X.org. I've also got a bunch of presentations and webinars from throughout the last 4 years, five years even. So go check those out. It's available for all of it's available for members, and then a good chunk of it for folks that aren't members of OTT.X as well. I also want to mention that registration is now open for our flagship conference event, the OTT.X Summit. It's going to be taking place in LA on September 25th and 26th. We have a fantastic program scheduled, replete with thought-provoking keynotes from presenters including Wall Street analyst Laura Martin and serial entrepreneur and founder of Reach TV, Linwood Bibbins, as well as a whole lot of research presentations, deep dives, industry meetings, and working sessions. So you will want to be there. You can register for this for the session at our website, again, at OTT.X.org. Again, and that is complimentary for all OTT.X members. If you're not a member, why not? Join us. It's a great place to be. So where all the cool kids are hanging out. You can email us at info@OTT.X.org, and we'd love hearing from you. Get you connected with our community. Thanks, everybody. That concludes our webinar today. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and happy and safe streaming.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.